Awesome to welcome the technical director for Netherlands basketball and former FIBA 3x3 head coach Brian Benjamin to the basketball podcast. From 2016 to 2021, Brian Benjamin was the head coach of the 3x3 men's national team of the Netherlands. After his teams won several medals at the Europe Cup and World Cup, the men's team qualified for the Olympic Games in Tokyo. Brian Benjamin is currently the technical Netherlands Basketball Federation, a position in which he oversees and is responsible for all national teams and the talent programs 3x3, 5x5, and wheelchair basketball of the Netherlands Basketball Federation. Brian, welcome to the Basketball Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
This is fun, and the Netherlands qualified for Tokyo Olympics, and certainly a lot of success in 3x3. And I think the most obvious question before we get into 3x3 and its benefits for coaches around the world is how does a country like Netherlands, which isn't known for their 5-on-5 as much, be so successful in 3x3?
I think the main thing is focus, I would say. We started in 2016, and back then it wasn't even an Olympic sport yet, but we had the notion that it was going to be. So the federation asked me if I could develop a program that would give us a head start, that if it would become Olympic, and that probably would have a head start on all the other countries, and just hope that we would make it. But when you have a long-term vision, obviously it helped.
Long-term vision. And talk to us a little bit just quickly about the difference between developing a 5-on-5 national team program and developing a 3x3. Are there benefits? Are there challenges? What's different about both those?
I would say that one of the things with 3x3 national team is that, like a club team, at least we had, because that was part of the strategy, we had our players the whole year. So you can work on your team, you can play your tournament, and every time you can go back, analyze what went wrong, and adapt it to your daily practice situation. Whereas building a 5-on-5 national team, it's very difficult because basically you have two windows in November and in February, which you have your team for 10 days. And it's very difficult to raise the level of the team unless you have your players playing already the highest level. Let's say all of your players already play Champions League or EuroLeague. But if that's not, it's very difficult. And then you can do it, but then you would need your summer program. So every summer you would have to have your team together for 4 weeks. And that is also extremely challenging because it's the off season and players either want to have vacation or they want to work on their own individual development. So I would say it's a lot easier to progress and improve your team in a 3x3 setting than in a 5-on-5 national team setting.
No, that's great. I'm glad you highlighted that for all of us to understand. And 3x3 is 3-on-3 has existed throughout basketball forever, but 3x3 is a little bit newer in that sense in terms of those rules and everything that comes from FIBA. So maybe let's just start with kind of the description of the game, which is a 10-minute sprint. And most people I talk to just talk about it being so fast and exciting. So maybe highlight that for our listeners.
Yeah, there are a couple of differences with 5-on-5. Obviously, you play half court. I think the biggest difference for me is the shot clock. You have a 12-second shot clock, so that changes the way you approach. There's no bringing up the ball. There's no in between 3-point lines that you relax. There's always pressure. There's always pressure on the defense. There's always pressure on the offense. Another big difference is the points, how you score. So you have 1 and 2 points. So in regular 5-on-5 basketball, you have 1, 2, and 3 points. And the big difference, because the 2-pointers are twice as many points, it's a big factor in the game, in your game strategy. And I would say the fouls. So there's no maximum fouls that you can have as a player, but as a team, there's a maximum of 7 fouls. And once you have your 7th foul, every foul is 2 free throws, and the 10th foul is 2 free throws and possession. So I think those are the main characteristics: the shot clock, the point system, and the fouls. Those are the things you have to, I would say, those are the conditions that you use to build your game strategy and basically your whole program.
So 10-minute games as well. And you said the points. I want you to just highlight that a little bit. So for the 2 points in this game, it's basically 50% more value. And in 5-on-5, obviously a 3-pointer is 33%. So talk to us a little bit about that strategy then. How does that influence how you play offense and defense?
So I don't know how other coaches do it, but I like stats. With 3x3, with 5-on-5 basketball, you would say on average you would have to shoot 35% threes, to beat the 50% twos. With 3x3, it's about 25%. So there's a lower percentage to be more efficient. If I look at that, a good spread of offense would be, let's say, have 40% to 50% of our shots should be 2-pointers, because it makes for an efficient shot mix on offense. Like in 5-on-5 basketball, going to the free throw line obviously is always the best, because you get whatever, I would say a point per possession at least. So that's the highest efficiency. So that's the same. Defensively, my philosophy is to always take away the 2-point shot. If you can limit that, teams cannot make runs. It's that simple. You can score 4 times in a row and you can make once 4 times in a row, and I only have to make 1 2-pointer, and it's back to 1 possession. So on defense, my main strategy is always take away all 2-point shots so teams cannot make runs.
Okay, so you said something there that translates for all coaches around the world. The value of the 3-point shot is certainly heightened over the last 10 years. So particularly from the defensive standpoint that you said, in terms of the emphasis of taking away the 3-point shot, the question for all coaches that they're sitting there wondering is, how do you do that? And does that help us in 5-on-5 as well understand some of these strategies to be able to take away the extra value of this 2-point shot?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm amazed, even if I watched the finals and the NBA finals, how teams easily give up 3-point shots. So my main strategy, obviously it can change here, but my coaching philosophy is based on limiting your mistakes. If you limit your mistakes, your opponent has to be better than you are. I don't like to do a lot of different things, because if there's a lot of variations that you do, obviously there's more opportunities to make mistakes. My main defense philosophy is we switch everything. Because our main focus on defense is take away the 2 points. I don't care if there is a mismatch, as long as you don't give up a 2-point shot. So we switch, and we switch on contact. So our number one rule in defense is touch and talk. Everybody touches his guy always, and you talk. And when we switch on contact, and we switch out high. So if there is a ball screen and there is a switch, we don't switch flat, but we come out in an angle of 90 degrees to take away the dribble penetration, and we try to limit the ball movement in that perspective. One of the things is also that we don't let guys dribble into their shooting range. So when we play defense on a 2-point shot, we play outside the 3-point line, just so you don't get into the situation that a guy starts dancing and you have to step back and retrieve within the 3-point line. So we always step up high with the risk that somebody beats us. But then there's still a long way. If you're out, let's say you're 2-3 meters outside the 3-point line, there's still a long way to get to the basket. So anything can happen. And I think that is one of the things that I would see in 5-on-5 basketball, that I think they go underneath the screen, or a guy comes dribbling his dance, and we step inside the 3-point line, so they're in the shooting range. Just stay up high, and even when they penetrate, they still would have to make the right decision. So that you have to pick your poison, I would say, and our solution is not to give up 2-point shot.
So I love what you just said about the 90 degree angle when you switch. I find that's a huge problem, just as like you just highlighted, that too many people switch passively. The idea is to switch and be able to move the ball farther from the rim on that initial, we call it a shock, that initial shock, because that translates to the ball screen kind of concept. Even though we're switching, we still want to shock the ball to make it move away from the basket and not get comfortable at the 3-point line. So I just want you to emphasize that a little bit more for coaches, maybe about how you teach that to players, particularly when the offense counters by rejecting that switch and trying to attack back where they came.
Again, it goes back to the first rule of our defense set, always talk and touch. So if somebody's always in touch with their man, if somebody doesn't use the screen, obviously because you're in contact with him, you don't have to switch, so he stays attached. If he uses the screen, we tell them to push their guy and to run up. So basically, that's why I say that I like things simple. Because we know that we switch on all ball screens, it means that if there is a ball screen situation, we always play it as a switch. So the defender of the screener always has to go. And he calls the screen. If he calls the screen and he calls the switch, he is going. And the other guy has to know that he has to jump underneath the guy who's setting the screen, because that's the second thing. Obviously, we give up the 1 versus the 2, but we're not going to give up easy layups. So whenever there's a screen situation, the defender who's playing defense on the screener, he calls switch. He has to go out all the way, and the other defensive player has to get underneath the screener to prevent an easy roll. Again, when you have the ball as a post player and you're 4 or 5 dribbles away from the basket, it's still difficult, even against a smaller player, to get to the rim. You have a defensive 3-second rule, and when an offensive player has the ball, he cannot dribble the ball stationary for longer than 5 seconds, I believe. So if a post player has the ball outside the bucket and he has to dribble more than 5 seconds, it's also a turnover.
Sorry, I was just going to say the switching part is obviously pretty important to take away the 3-point shot. I'm wondering the balance, just as you're talking about this, the balance from an individual versus team development standpoint for offense. What is the value of shot creation in 3x3 versus the value of the team actions? Because when I watch 3x3, especially the good teams like yours, Serbia, etc., they run so many great actions, 2 and 3 player actions. So talk to us about that. We would think with a shorter shot clock, there might be more value to shot creation, but that's not always the case, is it?
No, I would say it's a shot clock thing. I think the misconception is when people talk about 3x3 that they think it's street ball and everybody's playing one-on-one. Obviously, that would be the worst kind of offense because it's very inefficient. We run a lot of off-ball actions, redirection, screens, rescreen situations, because when players are moving, it's just easier to play offense. It's the same as in 5-on-5 basketball. If somebody goes ISO all the time, it's very easy to play defense on. So that doesn't change. When shot creation is important is once you get, let's say, quarterfinal, semifinal level in a world tour, first of all, the defense is really good and all of the top teams know each other. So they know your actions. They really know how to play defense on it. And then when they stop your first and second action, then it comes to your ability to create shots. Then obviously you need it, but initially you want to run it. But at the end of the day, it's like in any other league, like an NBA or Euro League, your ability to make difficult shots, even in one-on-one situations, basically determines your ability to win close games. Because the defense is so good at that level that you need guys that are able to shoot a step back or finish contested shots. It doesn't change.
It's great to know.
Situations, high pressure situations, it's still the same.
So with this expertise that you've developed in terms of understanding how to take away the 3-point shot by switching, I'm imagining another expertise that you would have to develop, particularly with your brand of basketball, is how to counter switches or how to attack mismatches. So what is common for you in terms of trying to attack some of these switches the
first one is obviously that you create a team that if a team is switching, you want to create a matchup that you want. And that goes back to having players that are really good in playing one-on-one. So we have Worked de Jong, which I think is one of the top one-on-one players in 3x3. So if teams switch against us, we make sure that the weakest defender gets switched onto him, and then we get isolation if we want. And obviously that raises our ability to get a high percentage shots in isolation. The other thing is that you run a lot of plays that puts the defense under pressure in the sense that they have to make a decision to either take away the shot or the roll or the slip towards the basket. Yeah, it's the regular counts. You have to fake screens, the pop outs, etc., to throw the defense off their rhythm.
And then with that, in terms of attacking switches in particular, do you find more often than not you attack from the perimeter more than you attack from inside? And then the second part that goes with that maybe is we see that in the NBA playoffs a lot where teams are just hunting a certain matchup to be able to force a switch. So is that common as well?
Oh yeah, that is common as well. As I said, if you have a really good one-on-one player, you would see that a lot. All of the top teams basically do that they put you in a switch situation. And a lot of times the screener is a good rebounder, so you have a double mismatch in that perspective, because even when you miss the shot, because it's so physical, you also have a rebound advantage underneath the basket. So most of the time when it's a big small switch, you can even live with a bad shot because there's a big chance, about 50-50, that you also will get the offensive rebound. I have to be honest that we, at a certain point, because if all the teams know that you switch all the time, it's easy to prepare. So obviously we mix it up. So sometimes we fight over the top, or we do a late switch when we fight over the top. Because one of the things that also helps with taking away the 3-pointer is if you fight over the top, you force them into long twos or contested layups. but I prefer not to follow that strategy because you never know if somebody can fight over the screen. And it doesn't give you the same certainty of taking away the two as when you switch. And it's the same, if it's a late game situation and you're up 3 with whatever 10 seconds to go, basically I would always switch everything. And that's how we basically treat every possession.
I think coaches listening are getting the idea that this is pretty exciting to learn from and to coach in a sense, because again, it's all problem solving, it's all figuring out things, and you remove those two players, it creates advantages and disadvantages, doesn't it? So in the 3-on-3 and the spacing that you have. Curious then from the standpoint of, in terms of some of those off the ball actions you mentioned, what do you find are some of the best actions, especially if we're talking about 2-player actions off the ball, to be able to occupy, help, or to be able to create spacing advantages?
So one of the things we do is when we're in transition, so basically when you have a defensive rebound, you first have to clear the ball by getting it outside the 3-point line. So it's either through a pass or to dribble. I prefer a dribble because it takes away all of the risks. Because if you pass, there's always, okay, I wanted to go left, or I wanted to go right, and somebody throws the ball out of bounds. And that always happens in the worst kind of moments. So I always prefer that when you have a rebound. So the
defense can steal the ball before you clear it?
Yeah, they can. And a good defensive team will pressure you. So it takes 2 to 3 seconds off the shot clock. So you have less time to execute your offense. So in general, we would dribble it out to the weak side. And we would have one guy on the top and one guy at the wing. And basically we have rules because everything is so quick. We have rules for everything. So that means if the shooter is on top, it will be a flare screen. And he flares out, he gets the ball, and immediately there falls a ball screen. If the shooter is down low, it's a down screen, and he comes up, and then we go to a back screen. Those are the most used off-ball actions. And basically from a set situation, it can be almost everything when the ball is on top. So when you start with a check ball situation, it can be a down screen for the wing to pop up, and then we follow the actions from there. Or it's like a horns set. You pass the ball to one elbow, and it's being followed by a back screen or a down screen. Those are the main actions we use.
So maybe we got to go back to some of the basics there for coaches. Okay, so checking the ball, when does that actually happen? Because the traditional version that we think in America, they're checking so much, and that doesn't happen that much, really, does it?
No, I would say on average, every team has 30 possessions. And I would say you would have about 10 to 12 check ball situations. So basically, anytime there's a foul or the ball goes out of bounds, you have a check ball situation on top.
And the game is officiated, but it's not coached, right? In a live game, you can't actively coach. Is that correct? Is it like tennis coaches from the sidelines screaming things, but not coaching?
Yeah, it's about the same.
Yeah.
I cannot say too much, but you cannot coach officially. Actually, specifically, the rule is that you can coach, but the players cannot visibly react to what you're saying. Yeah. But we use, for instance, codes, especially in defense situations. We call out red, and red means no twos and no fouls. Blue is everything is fine. We can take risk on defenses, etc. So be overly aggressive to take away the 2 points, and we can foul because we have fouls to give, so don't give up easy baskets. And it's something we try to create an overall awareness within the team of what we're doing. I don't know how many times you're watching a game and somebody forgets what the score is or the foul situation, and they make an incredibly stupid foul and send the team to the foul line, or take a 2 where you need a 3 and stuff like that. So we're very big on that everybody understands what our situation is and what is expected of everybody in that given situation.
I love that. Efficient, effective communication and code. You gave some defensive examples. What might be an offensive example of something that you need to communicate quickly in code?
For offense, actually, we don't have it. But what we do in offense is basically we have a lot of mini sets. So I explained about our transition. Obviously, when you have check ball, you can call a play, whatever, 25 high. But in transition also, because there can be a lot of pressure, there's a lot of noise. So we try to automate a lot of things we do. So depending on if you clear the ball to the middle or if you clear the ball to the left or right side and where the shooter is, it determines our action, so that if we cannot communicate, at least everybody knows what is being expected of him. And it helps to limit your mistakes. Again, I'm a big believer that on average, teams lose more games than that their opponent wins a game. To explain, I think it's less about making big and winning plays of winning a game than teams making mistakes and that being the reason of that they lose a game. So my whole coaching perspective is you limit your mistakes. So no turnovers, no poor offenses, no missed box outs, no unnecessary fouls, etc. Don't beat yourself.
Love it. And you mentioned like one of your team goals was below 5 turnovers per game. Can you just put that in perspective for us relative to some of the goals for the game and relative to the number of possessions on average that you get per game?
Yeah, so when you have about 30 possessions, so I work back to what is it that you want to score on average. What I do is I love data and stats. So my benchmark is what is the number one team in the world and what do they score on average. So if let's say, what if Lehman or Hoop scores 20 points on average per game, then you go back, okay, if it's 20 points per average per game, what is our ideal mix of shot distribution? So you want to make 4 free throws every game. You want to shoot 50% on ones and you want to shoot 25% on threes, and you want to make at least 3 or 4 2-point shots every game. And based on that, you have a number, and then you calculate it back on how many turnovers you're allowed to have. So it's a maximum of 5 turnovers. So that's how you maximize basically your 30 or 32 possessions. And obviously, every offensive rebound you get is an extra possession. But that's how I try to break down the goals for our team in terms of what is it that we have to do. So I try to get away from, okay, if we win, we play well, and if we lose, we play poorly. Basically, what you want to do is you want to measure our performance against our own benchmark.
Love that philosophy. And you highlighted a little bit what you would do defensively versus ball screen. But I'm curious about the off the ball type of defensive philosophy in 3x3. Is it very adaptable, very player specific in terms of scout that dictates how you defend off the ball, whether you're in pack or whether you're in denial or different things like that?
No, so because there's no help side, and because you're never sure if the guy is going to pop or slip the screen or use the screen, our main rule is always stay in touch. Because if I'm in touch with a guy, if he goes for the screen and he pops, I can follow. If he slips, I can stay with him. And if he actually sets the screen, I can rob off of him, because you want to be in touch when you switch. And I remember when I said when you switch out, it's a 90-degree angle. You're close enough to do that every time. So he cannot turn the corner. So when we talk about off the ball action, it is basically the same that we do it. When now we have a team with an average height, so everybody's is around 195, so about 6'5", 6'6". So basically it makes it easy to switch everything. But in the past we had a smaller point guard, and then we did things like a triple switch. He would set a screen and the weak side help would come over and he would pop out to the weak side if we would have the chance to do it. So we would use those kind of things. But now, because we have similar heights players on the floor, basically we don't have to do that. But the main rule, because it's always talk and touch and you have to be attached to your guy, it doesn't make a difference if it's off ball or on ball, because again, help side, it's non-existent. We don't. There are teams that are doing it, but the problem with help side is because you're not attached to your man, once you go and help, it's always an open 2-point shot because there's nobody to rotate off of the open guy. And the other thing is that if you're not attached to your guy, it's very difficult to rebound. That's also a main thing. We don't give up a lot of offensive rebounds, and it helps when you're attached to your guy to not do that.
So I wanted you to go here because the no help concept really puts an emphasis on one defense, doesn't it? So I'm sure you have some insights about how to develop and teach this one-on-one defense, because I think all coaches in the world know that if you keep your defense out of rotation in 5-on-5, you're a better defensive team. 3x3, you've got to stay out of rotation because, as you said, you're in touch and you're trying to play this one-on-one defense.
Yeah. First of all, I think that is the main benefit of 3x3 when you want to develop complete basketball players. My role in the federation is I'm the high performance sporting director. So I'm also responsible from our youth national teams from under 15 until the under 20 national teams. Our ideal picture is that any player we have basically is a player that can guard 1 to 4 positions and can switch out, can stop the penetration, can switch out and put pressure on somebody, even if it's only for 2 or 3 seconds until there's enough help in place. Our youth talent development program, we let all of our players also play 3x3 just for them to learn how to play defense because they're forced. It's not in 5-on-5 where you can switch out and then you can just guide somebody by icing into to a certain help defender. No, you actually have to stand your ground. So from a teaching perspective, it's great to teach guys how to play defense, but also how to be smart on defense. It's not only big that have to play defense on small, but also small players that have to learn to play defense in the post. Now, how do you catch a guy? How do you get him off balance by when he takes a second dribble to take a step back and pull the chair? How do you front a guy and make it difficult for him? So that's a teaching point. When we had the qualification tournament for Tokyo, we played France in the semifinal. So for us, that was, let's say, the pivotal game, because if you win your semifinal, you were qualified. And France basically did the same as us. They switched everything. But it's not just switching, it's all of the little things that you have to take into consideration. So if there is no ball pressure and you switch everything, obviously, if there's a pick and roll and there's no ball pressure, it's going to be an easy pass for everybody because there's no help. Switching everything on the off ball, if you're playing defense on the guy who has the ball, who is the passer, there has to be pressure on the ball because you make it difficult. So one of the main things that we do is throw the timing off of every action. So if somebody wants to go and set a screen, you bump him, so you take him out of his rhythm. You change the angles that they want to use. When somebody sets a ball screen, we follow him, and just before he sets a screen, we give him a little push to make sure that he ends up a little bit higher. So it's easier for the ball defender to jump underneath him so he doesn't have an easy roll. And those little nuances make a big difference in terms of just switching, especially the switching on contact. If you switch early, like I would say, what in 5-on-5 is very common. My guys are going to go and set a screen. I know he's going to go and set a screen, and I expect the guy who's coming off the screen to come to me. So I just stop and I say switch, and I wait for him to come to me. But then you have a gap of a meter or half a meter that if he slips, I'm lost because I can never make up. So those are the things of switching on contact, which is a pivotal rule in how we switch, that makes a big difference in being out executed or performing a perfectly executed switch. And that is repetition. That is repeat over and over.
So you mentioned the value of 3x3 in terms of player development, which I love. And this is one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on, is because it helps spread this message more, the value, because we play 3x3 in almost every player development session where we have 6 or more players because of the speed of it, because of the decision-making component, et cetera, all the value of small-sided games we know. I'm curious, would you, if you coach 5x5 or 5-on-5 right now, would you be playing a lot of 3x3 within those practices to be able to develop players, but also develop some of your team concepts?
I would say there is not one 5-on-5 coach who doesn't use 3-on-3 in small-sided games or breakdowns. So that's why sometimes I always find the whole discussion between it's 5-on-5 or 3x3 ridiculous, because first of all, there's not one 3x3 top player who didn't play 5-on-5. Nobody. Everybody played on a certain level and everybody started on 5-on-5. I think it's a ridiculous discussion. Why I think there should be more emphasis on 3x3. First of all, you can use any situation. You can use on ball, off ball, cutting, etc., because you can basically simulate any regular basketball situation in a 3x3 setting. Specifically in terms of using the 3x3 rules is every action matters because it's 12-second shot clock. It emphasis details are important. So if you miss one screen in 3x3 because of 12 seconds, basically you've lost an offense because the screen wasn't set in the proper angle. And again, this is another detail. The angle of the screen, because there's so much pressure and there's so much physicality, the angles of the screens have to be really right for every screen that you use. So the details in 3x3 of setting screens, using screens, are much more important in 5-on-5, where in general you just see a guy standing there having a little cross screen, etc. In 3x3, if you miss a screen, basically your offense will end up in an isolation, which is always the worst thing that you want to have. In terms of using it as a teaching tool for players to understand how to use screens, so wait for the screen, creating the right angle, setting your man up, it's perfect for them because of the 12 seconds. If you don't do it right, you immediately get punished. There's not a reversal and you can do it again. No, it has to be right every time. And the 12-second shot clock pressures you to make the right decision every time.
So take us in. I love that, by the way. Great answer in terms of the 5-on-5, 3-on-3 type of situation. But take us deeper in terms of how do you practice? What does a practice look like for just a 3x3 dedicated practice?
In general, we start with 1-against-0 game shot. So we start close to the baskets, 1-against-0 actions. Then we go most of the time in 2-against-0 or 3-against-0 game concepts of screen and roll, screen and pop kind of shooting and layup actions. Then we go into game type shooting contests, so everybody's warm. Then we stretch. And in general, then we go to 2-on-2, first 2-on-2 breakdowns, and then 3-on-3 breakdowns. Most of the time, it's about screening situations. It's in defense that we work on. One of the concepts we do a lot is we use different shot clocks. In transitions, for instance, we don't use a 12-second shot clock, but we use 8 or 10, just for players to speed it up a little bit. On the defensive side, what we do a lot is we work on series of stops. We call it kills. So basically, you have to get 3 stops in a row, but they have to be perfect. So no missed defensive rebound, no fouls. But also, we go into extreme. If you give up an open 3-pointer, even if they miss it, it doesn't count as a stop. If you miss a switch or you don't call a switch, it doesn't count as a stop. So we try to be really repetitive in the main objectives that we think will make a difference in our game situation. So sometimes we play games that only 2-point shots. So the defense also knows that, but that's a game situation because sometimes they try to take it away, and then we have to be creative in still finding good open shots. One of the things I like about 3x3 is it also, because there are less players on the floor, it gives you the opportunity to work on both offense and defense at the same time, because you have more oversight with 3 players.
So it's great to understand all of that and some really great examples of constraints. Using these different types of constraints to be able to shape learning. Those are excellent in terms of that, whether it's multiple stops or obviously only 2-point shots, et cetera. And those are things that we can add to any basketball coaching. I'm curious from our standpoint, not knowing or having watched, how many people are generally at your practice in terms of practicing when you do 3x3 practice?
Ideal would be 9 players. That would be ideal. Because then there's one team on offense, one team on defense, and there's one team out. So you can continuously rotate in new players. So every time it can be offense, so one team is on defense, or the other way around, the defensive team stays and new offense comes in. Or 2 teams are playing and the third team is on the side and they discuss what they have to do when they come in the next time, and you're coaching that team and assistant coaches working on the team on the floor, or the other way around. So in general, when we can work with a rotation of 3 teams, that gives us, I would say, the ideal situation to work with in terms of intensity and rest.
You mentioned transition a number of times on offense, and you highlighted some of the things you do offensively. What are some things you're doing defensively to counter their transitions, whether it's the dribble out or the pass outside the 3-point line?
Again, this is also one of the things that translates really well into 5-on-5 basketball. So as soon as the defense gets the ball, they have to clear it. So you're allowed to play defense. So one of the things that we do is we try to force the dribbler or the pass to the side or into the corner. Because once somebody dribbles out the ball and he dribbles to the corner, that's the worst position basically where you can end up, because you never want to have a baseline drive in 3x3, because basically you're allowed to push somebody over the baseline. But to get the ball to the top is a really risky pass. It's basically the pass from wing back to the top. That's not a pass that you want your guards to throw or your wings to throw in 5-on-5. So we try to force them into the corner. So it takes them more time to get to a 45-degree angle or to a top angle to have a better angle to attack. So we try to pressure them as much as possible to take 2 or 3 seconds off the shot clock. And then they only have 9 seconds to get into their offense. And getting the ball to the right spot will probably take them another 1 or 2 seconds. And then basically there's not enough time for them to run 2 actions. Because in general, a good 3-on-3 offense has 2 actions in it. A screen down, getting the ball, and screening the ball. But when you only have 7 seconds, it's almost impossible to have two actions in one offensive sequence. So we try to delay the advancement of the ball. And I would say basically it's the equivalent of picking somebody up full court and basically making it difficult for them to advance the ball. Again, it's something I see a lot, that I think, why would you just let somebody dribble up the ball? If you pick him up, at least has to think about it. And instead of thinking of what he wants to run, he has to think of protecting the ball. So for
So
us,
when they, sorry,
in
just
our youth,
clarify for us, when they get possession of the ball, is that when the shot clock starts? I'm imagining then in the overall, compared to 5-on-5, there's more end of clock situations, clearly, just because the shot clock's shorter. What is your
yeah,
preference offensively in terms of getting late clock? And maybe first define what is late clock?
late clock for us, it's 5 seconds. And for me, we define it as 5 seconds on the shot clock. And if that's the case, our preference to always go to a ball screen situation. And we use signals for it. So the guy who's going to set the screen, he raises his fist. So not to confuse that somebody comes up and you pass on the ball. So he raises his fist so everybody knows he's going to go and set the screen. And in general, the fist he's raising, that's the side he's going to set the screen. So the ball handler also knows that the screen is coming from that side and that he has to wait until the screen is there, because there's nothing more annoying than somebody setting a screen and he isn't there yet and you get a moving screen. I think that's the worst situation. We don't like to go to ISO because in general, you always get a really poor shot. So 5 seconds, if we can get a screen on the ball, it puts more pressure on the defense than when we have an ISO, because there's a decision to be made. Do we switch? We don't switch. Somebody's rolling, so what is the weak guard?
You mentioned the value in development to overall, and let's put your technical director back hat on and say, we value this 3x3 throughout in terms of development. You mentioned the defensive value. What is the main offensive takeaway from a development standpoint for your players in terms of playing a lot of 3x3 in their basketball development?
Always being a threat. I would say, especially in the Dutch culture, but we had a tendency to catch the ball. And then when you catch the ball, then start thinking of what am I going to do? Because there's only 12-second shot clock. Basically, whenever you catch the ball, you catch it to shoot the ball. And if you don't shoot it, you catch to attack a closeout or to attack the screen. And that is something I think in our culture, but in general in basketball, that when you have the ball, you always have to be a threat. And I think that's the main advantage, because players are learning not to get the ball and then look for 2 or 3 passes or 5 passes and not being a threat. If everybody on the floor is a threat, your offense becomes much more efficient. If everybody can make a decision, I can shoot, I can drive, or can use the screen. So it also has to do with our culture, because we never emphasize individual skills development. So a lot of our offensive sets are based on 5 out and passing the ball in our youth development program. So what you got a lot of passive players. So as soon as they get the ball, coaches are yelling, pass the ball, you have to pass the ball and move. So they completely forget that the first thing you play basketball is because you want to score. That gives you that sensation of achievement, etc. So I think 3x3 helps us to refocus our players to what is really important in basketball. And it's when you have the ball, you have to have the ability to score. Catching the ball, be a threat.
Love that. And to me, that connects, being in the youth basketball space quite a bit right now, that connects to retention in basketball as a sport as well. Because I can tell you, watching so many players that come to me for the first time, and they've never been encouraged or empowered to play offense. All they are, like you said, is a passer. And that means they're less likely to develop. They're less likely to stay in the game. And we lose these players at a very young age because we emphasize these offensive systems which encourage the pass rather than be a basketball player.
I coach a youth basketball team, and one of the things, because everybody plays 5 out because it is a system in youth, because there's no specific position that you play, and it is supposed to give you a right spacing. But the thing that really annoyed me is the guard dribbles up the floor, and the first thing he's doing is he's looking to pass the ball to somebody. So I was looking for something to work on, and then I found the dribble drive offense. And obviously, it's a simplified offense. So when you play on a very high level, it's easy to defend. But I think in developing players to have the right skills, I thought it was great, because the first thing you do in the dribble drive is you try to beat your guy 1-on-1 and to create a 1-against-0 situation. So either they rotate or you have a layup or an open shot. And I think the same goes for 3x3. Obviously, we don't play a lot of 1-on-1, but ability to attack closeouts or to be a threat when you have the ball, I think that is the fundamental thing that you have to teach. You can teach everybody to pass the ball. It's the simplest action to pass the ball from the top to the wing or vice versa. So I think the first focus when we teach basketball should be on teaching players how to play 1-on-1, either shooting, using a screen, or attacking a closeout. All the other stuff, it's easy to learn, but it's so much more difficult to teach somebody to be aggressive with the ball and to make the right decision.
Couldn't agree more. And curious, as you mentioned, one-on-one and the value of the one-on-one in terms of development. Can you give us some ideas of how you shape one-on-one within development sessions? About what type of constraints or what type of one-on-one versions are you playing to be able to help? Because I just know, and coaches, you can connect this, FIBA 3x3 and the rules are a great version of one-on-one as well. You just remove two players, you can play the exact same rules with the exact same shot clock and develop one-on-one skills. But what are some different ways that you play?
I like closeouts. I like to do closeout drills where players have to read the action. I don't like to play because we have different situations. So the closeouts and for guys getting the ball out of the pass. What is important for us is that players learn to use their speed. So we do a lot of live dribble situations that the ball owner has to create his own space in a space constraint. So we put out two pillars on the sides. They cannot go too far to the left or to the right. So they have to be efficient in how they attack the defense. So the main drills that we use are closeouts or live dribble situations to force the players to be creative in creating their own one-on-one space. And then we use constraints like, okay, when you shoot a three-pointer, you get 3 points. When you shoot a long two, it's 2. And if you go into the bucket and you score, it's 2 points again. So we use different point systems to reward the kind of shots that we want to have. Another thing we use a lot in 3x3 is finishing with contact. So we do a lot of drills with the defense being on the side of the offensive player, and the offensive player has to learn to initiate contact and not use speed, but use his body to control the defense to finish with contact. That's one of the main difference, I would say, with 5-on-5 drills, that your ability to finish with contact, because there's much more contact allowed, especially when you dribble, to teach players how to do it. And again, obviously, that's also beneficial in 5-on-5 if you teach players how to initiate contact and control the defensive player with their body and use that to step through, to stop and fake, etc.
Brian, this has been awesome. So many insights that we can apply to our coaching. And I guess the curiosity is FIBA 3x3 keeps growing. We talked about bigger countries getting involved and some of the traditional basketball countries getting more involved. How do the Netherlands keep competing? How do you stay relevant like you are, fifth in the Tokyo Olympics, qualified, all those different things?
Yeah, glad you asked it. When we qualified for Tokyo, it's only because the bigger basketball countries are not taking it seriously. Watch until Paris starts, then all the big countries are going to step in, and then the Netherlands are going to fade away. And we didn't. And I think the main reason why is you have to continue to adapt and innovate. So when I started, we were known for a pick and roll team. We were really good at pick and roll. We were, I think, the best pick and roll team in 3x3, and we ran by far the most pick and rolls. Then we adapted and we became one of the most prolific 2-point shooting teams. And we've always been a really good defensive team. One of the main pillars of a program is our physical development program. One of the things is my team will never lose on conditioning. So we have a data-driven conditioning program. Basically, we use data to see what is the maximum output on any given top performance that we have. And we translate it back into our daily practice situation in terms of how long we have to go, how hard we have to go on our heart rate. And what we also do is we have, I think, a full professional weightlifting program. I think every player we have has put on anything between 3 to 4 kilos of weight on muscle mass, because one of the main things in 3x3 to be able to guard your man is you have to be physically strong. So all of the players go through to an extensive weightlifting program so they get stronger. So I think that was one of the things that helped us improve a lot. And if I look further ahead, I think the next step for us would be to be even more data driven. So now basically we use data for a physical program, but I think the next iteration of a program would be to also look at the performance. What is our screen rate? So how many screens do we set? What's the percentage of those screens that we actually executed? How many box outs did we miss? How many 2-point shots did we actually take away? Who is taking away the 2-point shots? Who is not staying attached to their man? So we can have a percentage on that, and that helps us to feed that back into our daily practice situation. So everything we do is basically even more data driven. Again, I don't like to look at our program in terms of when we win, we play well. If a team scores 17 points against us, then I want to go back and I want to see, okay, so if we had 25 situations that somebody had to be attached to their man, how often did we do it? and basically who is the person who's missing an assignment, so we can take it back into the video room, show the player, and take it back on the floor. I think that's how we will make LA 2028, I would say.
Netherlands basketball is not going anywhere. That's what we learned. It's beautiful. They're lucky to have you. They're lucky to have this type of influence on their game, and grateful for you to be able to share with us so many insights that we can apply as coaches. Brian, thanks so much for sharing the game with us.
Thank you for having me, and good luck with the podcast.